Ah. Non pas. Il peut mettre le slide en full screen sans les... Hello, do you hear me well? Oh, okay, now it works. Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here despite this title. Yeah, my name is Fatemeh. Here is Silke.
Hi guys.
Yours?
Hi guys. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and so before we delve into the topic, just a couple of words about myself. My name is Fatemeh, as I said. I'm a crypto lawyer, worked in the space for a couple of years in various projects. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now.
Yeah, I'm Silke. I'm the General Counsel, Chief Legal Officer of Nurses. I've also worked in the space a few years, talking about and advising on how to minimize your risk in this space.
Cool. Outline. So today we're going to talk to you about how to mitigate crypto legal risk. So we're going to start by context. You're going to see it's maybe one of my favorite parts of this presentation. Then we're going to give you some steps on how to do your crypto legal risk assessment. We're going to delve into detail in what we call here the tool of decentralization. And we're going to end by giving you some general tools or tips how to mitigate your legal risk. Hopefully by the end of this talk, you're going to have a better overview of what projects in the space do, why do they make some of the design choices that they make. You hopefully be able to recognize what would look like legal strategies from the project, and also have these in the corner of your head in case you have your own project that you want to do. Yes, this is not legal advice. I like this meme, I made it. So, yeah, this is not legal advice for many reasons, and I think it's really, really important to emphasize it now. Crypto legal risk is huge, and we don't really know what it is, right? So these protocols or softwares are kind of boundaryless, and apply everywhere. Many jurisdictions have kind of a reach to these projects or want to regulate them. We don't really know how. We don't know how the legacy regulations apply to some of the softwares, and we don't know how these regulations are going to change. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and the tools we have right now, we hope they work. We are implementing them in a way for later to help us, but we actually have very little clue. Yeah, disclaimer. Another disclaimer. So when we talk here about laws and regulations, what we mean is laws and regulations enacted by nation states. This is not to be equal to moral or ethical norms. So it's not because you can do something without having any form of enforcement against yourself that it means that you should do it, right? So please, in whatever you do, try to abide by the best standards in the industry, but also your best judgment, and be very ethical. Sorry, I have to say it. If you have ill intentions with your software, this presentation is not for you. We cannot help you, and most likely it will end up being criminal. Yay, fun. Yeah, so now Silke is gonna tell you about how to assess your legal risk.
I'm actually going to stay a bit longer on the morals and the ethics. So a good way to start assessing your legal risk is to ask yourself whether the protocol or the product you're building is high risk. Basically, I mean, are you just going to sell socks? I mean, normal socks? Or are you building maybe some privacy-preserving DEX that allows you to do untraceable transactions? Then perhaps you might have to look into these questions a bit deeper. And so every project usually, I mean, here at the conference, everyone knows what the benefits are of their product. We are all idealists, so, I mean, you build it because you think it's going to improve the world, usually. I mean, in this space, at least. But you ask yourself, so what harms can this software cause? And to come back to my privacy-preserving DAX, well, the first one, of course, is, oh, well, my software might be buggy, and then, you know, your users lose funds. The second one would be, well, maybe you're enabling someone to fund a terrorist attack. Yeah, so you would want to think about this. So when you're this little team maybe building this protocol, and you're based in a certain jurisdictions, and so now the legal question really becomes, so if you're a decentralized team, is your product regulated or maybe even forbidden in the place where you actually are? So maybe, so you look into this question, you get some lawyers, and they're going to tell you, well, you're based in country X, and in your country, well, we might be able to just publish the code on GitHub. If you're lucky, you could also deploy it, but hosting a front end on this thing is not going to be possible in this jurisdiction. Or maybe they're going to say, well, actually, you can host your front end, but to do that, you'll need all these licenses. Maybe you need something similar to a banking license. Or you might have to comply with a license that is not really suitable to your tech. So you are kind of in a gray area, not sure, well, are we doing something wrong or not? So the big question here is, well, do you want to try to submit to being licensed, or do you not want to try to submit to being regulated? If the answer is yes, you're going to try it. You're going to try it in the jurisdiction where you are based. Then, I mean, this talk would end here. You're going to get your regulatory lawyers. They're going to help you. You might even redraft your code, rewrite your code to make it nicely compliant. But likely, I mean, there are probably people here, you wouldn't want to do this. You're like, nope, maybe that's not a good idea to get this banking license for my untraceable DEX. So, of course, we're lawyers. We're also going to look at the no. You might have just moved to Portugal, Lisbon, because you don't want to pay taxes on your crypto. And now you're wondering, well, how can we go into a more favorable jurisdiction? So likely what that means, you have to move bodies to wherever you want to be. I mean, we're not going to advise on like setting up some shell company somewhere and then hoping that you'll be safe, because that's not the case. So you just moved, or maybe, I mean, you might have really good reasons why you don't want to live in Berlin anymore. Well, you might not like the fact that there are no elevators, or not many elevators, or you don't like the German bureaucracy or the humorlessness. So there are really good reasons for you to move to Zug, into the countryside, and take your team there. Or even if you don't want to do that, yeah, well, you find some bodies there that will take really important functions in your project. The other option is, the second one is, well, there might be actually reasons beyond legal why you want to decentralize your project. And the important part is beyond legal. The third one is, you might just be a really good Satoshi. And the fourth one is, you listen to your lawyer's advice, you kiss them politely, fire them, and say, you only lived once, you're going to accept the risk, whatever that is, whether you calculated it or whether you didn't calculate it. And later ask for, fall on your knees in front of the regulators and say, I'm so sorry. Well, we don't recommend that.
Yeah. Hello. Do you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so just a couple of words about the last one. You always have to accept the risk, because there's also this part of the risk. There's unknown, there's always risk. Someone told me a couple of days ago, if you want to have no legal risk in crypto, just don't have any crypto. So this is, anyway, something you have to do. But ideally, you would mix all of these, right, path together. And be a very good Satoshi. I mean, this is, sorry, but almost impossible, right? To be entirely anonymous. This is not recommended, because by doing that, and if you want to do it thoroughly, you will have to breach a lot of laws. For example, do not, like, not declare your assets or whatever that is related to that project. So do not do this. So how decentralized is the project? This is a question you have to ask yourself in order to know where your project falls on this, like, spectrum of continuum of decentralization. And in order to do this, we tried to break down decentralization into 3 different categories, although these categories do overlap a lot. So this is not very clear categorization, just bear with us. Software. So you want to decentralize or have a decentralization as a strategy for your software. What does that mean? So you want to minimize centralized control over the software. If you have any kind of keys that give you some form of control over the software, especially if this control is not governed in a distributed manner, you want to minimize that. You want to also have a wide distribution of the token. This is pretty well known by everyone, right? You don't want to have big whales like VCs or the team that has like an outsized control and can basically solely influence the fate of whatever this software does. Financial benefits is very much linked to the previous point. So sometimes we see these softwares that, for example, will take a fee from users. And what do they do with this fee? So either they redistribute it in the pool or whatever, or they funnel it to the team of devs or to a foundation or an entity or someone. And this direct connection between the fees and the persons kind of put these persons in charge of whatever is happening on the software. And this is kind of a point that needs to disappear, in my opinion. So if you need these fees to be there, then maybe you should think of novel ways, or not so novel anymore, but put them in a DAO, for example, and then have it governed and given to whomever needs to spend them. Expectation on the core team. So again, like, you should put some distance between yourself, the core team, and the software, so that people don't just rely on you for it to work or be maintained. IP. This is a great point. So there's 2 sides to the IP. Softwares, open source, try to open source it, have it free software. And also the IP on the developer side, so, or researcher side. So what I've noticed recently in the past like 1 or 2 years is that some of the projects do push whomever holds the IP to assign it to an entity, and usually these entities are either, for example, a foundation, or you go offshore, you just assign it there, and you put distance between yourself as the author and the IP. So in case something goes wrong, you don't even own that IP. I have no idea how valuable this is in practice. Operations, which is traditionally very centralized. How to decentralize it, engage the community from day 0. So have them participate, have them permissionlessly participate, build, grow, very, very important. It makes your project way much more resilient, right? Have the deployment done by a third party. So in most of the places, we see nowadays that software or code is kind of accepted as speech or science, like you can have it on your GitHub repo. Deployment is another story. So the person who pushes the button and makes it all happen and then run in an autonomous fashion may be liable for it. So we do see in the space, like if you're a bit curious and you follow some projects that have it all of a sudden deployed, or just like have their legal structure done in a certain way that someone else deploys it, and again put some distance between the core team and the deployment. And community-run communication channels, so your Discord, Telegram, try to have it moderated by the community. You can directly engage with them and find moderators, or just let it be, and someone at some point will take charge. Obviously, there are a lot of trade-offs if you want to radically do any of these points. One last thing before we move to the third category is that by saying all of this, I am not saying, or we are not saying, that projects should go for radical decentralization. So if like you have just this autonomous software and there is no link to you and nothing you can do kind of to influence it, this is, in my personal opinion, a bad idea. And it makes it just not also resilient in face of innovation, either on the tech side or on the cultural or legal side. So you need to still be careful and pick kind of the points that fit with your project and implement those. Oh, I had more points. Front ends. Yes, centralized points, projects run their front ends. Often the easiest thing to do is to just go to Amazon Web Services and have it hosted there. And oftentimes also the cheapest way to have the AWS is to have service in the US. So this may be problematic because it may create an attachment to the US jurisdiction and have the regulators there kind of have a reach over your software. So try to pick well, if you use a centralized server, the jurisdiction in which you want it to be stored. Ideally, you do it serverlessly. And I mean, many projects do that nowadays. You can also outsource the front end, have many gateways deployed by the community to your software and so on. Governance, I'm not going to talk about this because I mean, it's a whole topic in itself, but if you want to decentralize, you would, without having it be entirely immutable or autonomous, then you need a form of governance. And have a contingency plan always in case something happens, laws change, regulators wake up, and be able to, for example, just shut down your entities, stop operating, knowing that the software will run and the community will take over.
So the third category we bundle those topics under is fundraising or token issuance. So that's very central to most startup. Well, you need to pay somehow for whatever you build, and there are few, when you focus on decentralization, those points are overlapping, but basically if you want to use decentralization as one like legal shield, one thing you should, often people, and this is a really good idea to do actually, I mean, you're a small team, you have no funds, you go to VC and raise some funds. Often the VC will get, you promise to give them some tokens later, because that's already what you plan. At that point, you should probably already be aware that, well, you want to make sure that these VCs don't become these massive whales, because then again you have a problem of having too many whales in your system and this not being decentralized enough. Then, I mean, from a decentralization point, I mean, there are token issuances, there are the traditional token sale from 2017, and there are airdrops, which in the last 2 years has become one of the main ways to actually decentralize your community, build a community, and also basically get around some regulation. Because token sales, tokens issuance is probably now one of the most regulated areas of crypto because of 2017. And airdrops are quite novel, so a lot of regulation is still building around it. There hasn't been much jurisprudence. There has been some, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that now. So you could also, I mean, there has been a lot of discussions on fair launch, which is another way to do it via airdrop. you don't pre-mint, pre-allocate, and then later ask the community you airdropped it to whether they want to give you some payment for what you've done before. So this isn't definitely like that. There are many more ways to deal with token distributions. This is just like some very novice graph of what is out there and how they compare. So when we look at, you have the traditional token sale, like you go on, you have an agreement with CoinList and do it there, then you might have an initial exchange offering. You might have an IDO, a balancer pool, you might fund a balancer or Uniswap pool. Then you might realize, actually, oh man, in my jurisdiction, I cannot even legally fund the balancer Uniswap pool. So you get a third party to actually do this for you. Or you might then think, actually, it's much better, as I just mentioned, maybe do some Merkle drop with team allocations, where the user actually has to claim, they have to do some activity to actually get the tokens. Or on the far right here is you have a fair launch with a locked drop, where basically you drop tokens on the users or on some community, and those are non-transferable. So in all this discussion, what's really important, and still has been since 2017, is the question whether your token is a security. It is a security, and if you do the last, or even if it's not a fair launch, it's just a drop with a non-transferable, what I call here lock drop, then you usually get in at least some jurisdiction around the whole issue of securities, because likely your token is not going to be a security, and the ones that make it transferable the community, because you've seen this with some projects. We've done this really well. One project was, for example, Tornado Cash. They had first, and they dropped first a non-transferable token, and then they organized the DAO that was constituted by those people who actually got the tokens to vote on the transferability of the token. So so you want to think about that, and of course it very much also depends on the timing. If you've been a team, you've been funded by VCs or somehow differently, or you just funded yourself, you've worked on your protocol or whatever you're building, your software, and it is actually ready. So in a lot of jurisdictions, what's required, you have to have a ready protocol. You cannot just launch something which has no usability, because that moment it usually becomes a security. You don't want to do that then without approval, and in a lot of jurisdictions, you wouldn't get approvals other than if you want to do a really a securities offering. However, when you look at airdrops, it's often the other way around, because you might actually want to bootstrap your whole community and the people building on it. You want to bootstrap it from the whole community. So you have to actually you should do the airdrop prior to deployment, because what you can do then is you can get your community to deploy it, the DAO deciding to deploy it, and you might even get a third party to deploy it, because you're just going to put it on GitHub. And in addition, you will have a lot of third parties to work on your protocol. So it very much depends on the time and where you are. You might be doing a few of those, but yeah, that's basically on token distributions. We've prepared a checklist, 5 pages, with all these questions on it. So if you have more detailed questions, it's also on there. So just to summarize some lines of defense here, we minimize central points of capture. You make sure it's not a security. We promised nothing, or, well, there is no single creator or operator, because actually it's all operated or by your bootstrap community. Favor clean airdrop or fair launch. And actually, I forgot something to say here. So there have been just some jurisprudence in the US, which basically suggested that token airdrops are also token sales, or they are unregistered offering of securities, if there's a benefit to the issuer. So you have in the past 1.5 years seen some airdrops where you think, oh, that's totally dumb, stupid. Why would you incentivize the people like that? And in fact, often you have a legal argument behind this where basically, well, this was done like that because it's for legal reasoning. You don't want to have this connection between the benefit to the issuer and to make sure that it's not a security or like characterized as a token sale. So I see a lot of questions and people like, that was really not really intelligent to do it that way. Often, you know, there are legal reasons why it looks that stupid. So this is not an endorsement of these projects, not at all. I'm not working on any of them. However, they have had very interesting legal strategies, at least for people to have a look at. I'm not saying not judging on the tech, on the protocol, whether it's good what they've built. It's just basically from a legal point of view, they have used very interesting ways to immunize the projects from, or like make it a bit more immune from legal risks. Yeah, and Fat.
Thanks. Yeah, so now that you got some like specific tools for crypto legal risk mitigation, these are like more general tools that do apply to crypto project, but you can also use them for whatever venture you do. The first one is a good one, clean trail. What does that mean? So in case you run into trouble, usually it happens like down the line, right? 1 year, 2 years, 4 years after. And then the person who is investigating you or suing you has its own narrative, and you have to come up with your own narrative as a defense line, right? And how do you sustain your narrative? You need to have proofs for it. So if you have that in mind from the very beginning, you also structure kind of your communications, especially written communications, in a way to leave the trail that you need to leave or that you should leave later. So be very mindful also of whatever you say in your Telegram or Signal chats, one-to-one chats. Like, people do screenshot. If you have sensitive phone calls, assume it is recorded. These are just like general paranoid tools that I think everyone should have in mind. Assess your liability. So once you assess your risk, it's important to also assess your liability. So what if this risk materializes? Like, what do I risk concretely? Is it just bankruptcy? Just the entity's bankruptcy? Maybe this is a risk you're happy to take. Then you like structure the treasury of this entity in a way that if it happens, then it's okay. If it's, for example, jail time for you, then the whole story is different and you need to put other things in place. Tax advice. Tax is really an annoying point usually because no one knows how cryptos are taxed. Like, tax lawyers or advisors are often lost. Even the tax authorities don't really necessarily know. And probably when the taxable event happens later, it will change, and depending on also the size of the taxable event, the authorities might have other approaches to it. So get tax advice in different jurisdictions in which you operate. So if you have a lot of employees in one jurisdiction, if you yourself are domiciled in another one, if your entity is somewhere else, get all of the tax advices in these parts that you can then rely on to structure in case something goes bad. You can always show that you got the advice. Hurry. This is very specific to some fields that we know are going to get regulated. So right now, regulators are really paying a lot of attention to privacy tech. We don't know what's going to actually exactly happen and how they're going to enforce it, but we know that they are having a close look at it. So we are kind of in these projects racing against the regulators in some ways. So if you deploy before there are any form of regulations, you still can, like, I mean, you did it in good faith. If you deploy after, it's way harder to sustain that point. So yeah, try to have, I mean, my personal opinion is try to have something that is worth being deployed as soon as possible, and then you can improve it. Disclaimers. We had many in this talk. Yeah, just use them. Legal personality. So understand how legal personality protects you, put layers between yourself, for example, and whatever you do. This is a tool that you can use. You just need to do your own research. Keep a low profile. So you don't have to actually keep a low profile, but don't go bragging on Twitter about whatever you, like, whomever is using your protocol, or say that, like, someone can money launder with your protocol, whatever. Maybe it can happen because your software is an infrastructure software and you cannot, like, block someone from using it. But also, like, try to keep a low profile, don't attract attention where it's not needed. Legal advice, I said it in the tags, just get as many as you can that sign off whatever strategy you do. This is also important for you to know that you're doing the right thing. And then, again, this is part of leaving this trail that you need to leave. Fragment the project. It's kind of decentralize it, fragment it. Even if you have one entity that does, for example, like you have a foundation in Switzerland that would do the community outreach, that would do grants, that would do, I don't know, software development, try to also fragment those. So the more fragmented, the harder it is also to pin down one entity or one person. D&O insurance, so directors and officers insurance, try to get one. Being investigated costs a lot of money, being sued costs, defending yourself costs a lot of resources. But oftentimes in crypto projects, it's extremely hard to find an insurer who is happy or ready to insure these risks, just because they are kind of hard to quantify. So what you can do alternatively, and there may be a lot of other ways for all of these lines that we put on this slide, but what you can do for the insurance part is have a pool of money that you segregate from the very beginning with the clear intention to use it in case you need to defend yourself or to participate in an investigation and so on. So once you segregate it and you give it a clear purpose, later on you can use it for this, and yeah, put a lot of money in there. Yay. Legal mitigation, legal risk mitigation tools are tested in prod, right? So we don't have any kind of perspective on whether or not they work. You can only implement them. There's no testnet for this. I mean, you can try to get regulators' approval beforehand by asking for a ruling, but this is in very few cases, in very few jurisdictions. So usually you just need to go for it and hope it works. I know it's kind of bad practice in tech. It is the norm in law. Yeah, do not be a low-hanging fruit, be responsible, have your best intentions in whatever you build, so in good faith later you can tell that you did not wish harm. This is your best, actually, legal defense. Like, you did everything in the best possible way you knew and abiding by the best industry standards. Talk. So why are we actually doing this talk? Is because we realize that there is this crazy bottleneck where having this kind of practical tools or information is really hard to get, so you need to be connected to other projects who already had gone to several lawyers over a long time and like spent a lot of money and got like, all these tools, or ask your VCs. They are repeat players, they have many projects, they are very well aware. Be mindful that they do also have a conflict of interest, like what do they want from the success of your project may be a little bit different than what you want, but nevertheless exchange with them, use them, they're very, very cooperative usually, if you have good ones. And yeah, so share this knowledge. We're attempting here to kind of not open source it, but spread it, open the dialogue around these topics, and try also to collaborate and coordinate around like one maybe global strategy that would work for everyone. And the last point, innovate with legal tools. Whatever tools we gave you here are definitely not the best. There may be and is probably way better ways to do it that are already done and we're not aware, I am not aware of it. And you can also innovate and create novel legal tools. Please do so. Do not just compromise and apply these tools, because then you end up with like a Frankenstein type of project that like you remove the nature of your own project just to be somehow compliant without even knowing if it's going to work. So yeah, do your research, tailor your strategies, and yes, we made a checklist. So that kind of summarizes all of this content we gave you, and that you can use kind of to assess your exposure to these risks, and then think of strategies. We're going to post the link on our Twitter, right? Yeah, so these are our handles.
It's much more detailed. It's much more detailed.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. For questions, we're going to be outside. There are other lawyers in this room, I see. Yes, so if you want to also answer those questions, you can join. Voilà.